Today I'm going to talk about how to pass data between pages in Ionic 2. There's a few different ways you can go about doing this, and I'm going to go through sort of the most common way to do it through to some more uncommon ways. So we're going to cover how to use just passing data using the nav controller and retrieving it with nav params. We're going to use modals, and we're going to use a provider to share data between pages. And we're also going to cover how to use events to pass data. So I'm just going to start out by generating a new application. We're going to generate a page as well, and we're just going to walk through all of the different examples. So I'm just going to run the start command to generate a new Ionic 2 application, and we're going to call this one just Ionic 2 pass data. We use a blank template and use the v2 flag. So we'll just wait for that to generate. Okay, so that's finished generating now. I'm just going to change into it. And then we're going to generate a page that we're going to use to pass data to, and also to pass data from that page back to our original page as well. So we're just going to run Ionic G page, and we're just going to call this second. And then we'll use our default home page as the other page that we're going to send the data from. Okay, so we're just going to serve that so we can check out what's happening in the browser. And before we can make use of that second page we generated, we're going to have to set that up in our module file. So I'm going to open up the code now in Sublime, and we're going to do that. Okay, so I've got the project open here. If you take a look in the source folder, we'll see under pages we have that second page we've generated, which looks just the same as the default home page. And so it's going to come into this app folder here, go to the module file, and we're going to have to import that and then add it to the declarations and entry components array in this file. So I'm just going to import that now, add it to the declarations array and to the entry components array. So with that done, we'll be able to use that page throughout the application now. So we're going to start off by showing how to pass data from a page that we've pushed to with the nav controller. So this is going to be a really common case. A lot of the time this is how your pages would work and how you'd pass data between them. And so to do that, we're going to just come to our home page here, and we're going to import that second page that we just generated, and we're going to push this onto the navigation stack, and we're going to pass some data to it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a function here that we're going to activate in the template. So we'll just call it launch second page, and we'll just get this hooked up first. So we're going to make sure it's all working. So I'm just going to log out clicked here for now, and then we'll open up the template here, and we're just going to create a button, and we're going to add a click handler here that launches or that triggers that function, which was launch second page. So if I jump over into the browser now, we should be able to click that and see that it logs out clicked to the console there, and it does. So that's working fine. So now we can change this function so that we launch our new page and pass some data to it. So to push a new page, we just use the nav controller here, which has already been injected for us by default. And we do this dot nav controller dot push, and then we supply the page that we're pushing. So we want to push second page. So I'll just save that and we'll check that it works. So if I click on this now, the second page comes up and the back button automatically displays. If we click that, it goes back to the original page. So if you don't really know how this works, if you've never come across it before, I'll link to some resources that you can check out that explains it in more depth. So we don't just want to push that page though, we want to push some data to the page. So let's say we have some data here that we want to pass along. I'll just make something up. Let's say we had some kind of recipe. So I want a title, which is yummy pancakes, and we might have an ingredients array, which can have flour, I guess, and pancake stuff. And we'll also put in one more thing, let me think, time. So we'll say it takes 10 minutes to go. So we want to pass all of that data into the next page. So what we can do, we have this data object now that contains all of that data, and we can just pass that in as a second parameter to push here. So if I supply that there, that'll pass that along. You can also, if you didn't want to predefine that data as a separate variable there, you could also just directly define the object here instead. But I'll just do it this way for now. So I'll save that, and I'm going to jump over into the second page now. And so what I need to do is grab that data that's being passed along. And you can see it has actually already injected nav params for us, which is what we're going to use to grab that data. So in the Ion view did load function here, which automatically gets triggered when the view is loaded, we can do this.navparams.get, and then we can get whatever data we are trying to grab. So let's say I want to grab the title. I can say get title here and save that, and we'll see if it works by jumping into the browser here. Sorry, that's not actually going to work because all I'm doing is referencing it here. I need to log that out so we can actually see what that value is. You could of course also assign it to some variable as well and use that somewhere else. But for now we're just going to log that out, and we'll see what that contains. So I'll let this refresh now. Click on the next button and you can see that it's logging out yummy pancakes there. So anything that we pass along in this data object here, we'll be able to access on that second page. So this works well for data that's flowing forwards. We want to push a new page, pass some data to it. Then we could also say have a third page and we'd push some data from the second page to the third page. But this doesn't work well for data that's flowing backwards. Let's say if we want to do something on the second page that we then want to pass back to our home page, we can't really do that with this method. So a really great way to handle that is to use modals. And so a modal is so essentially like a pop-up type page. Probably very familiar with modals on like Facebook in photo viewers, where it pops up the picture onto the page in front of everything else rather than going to a separate page. And so what we can do with that modal is we can pop it up, and then we can also add a listener. So when that modal is dismissed, that it passes data back to the page that launched that modal. So we're going to modify this now to use that method, and we're going to try and log out data from the second page in this home page instead. So before we can do that, we're going to have to import the modal controller. So we'll import that from the Ionic Angular library. And we'll also set it up, we'll inject it in our constructor here. Now we don't actually need this data anymore, so I'm just going to delete that so it's not confusing. What we do need to do is now create a modal. And so we can create a new variable to hold that. So we'll say let modal equal, and then we use the modal controller to create a modal from that. So I'll say let modal equal this.modal controller dot create, and then we just supply the page that we want to use, so second page. And then we can get rid of this here. And then once we have that created, we also need to display it. And to display it, we do modal.present. So I save that now, and we'll take a look at what happens in our browser. So if I click on next now, you can see it pops up that second page there. And we're still trying to grab stuff with nav params, which doesn't exist anymore, so that's why it's popping up undefined there. So right now I have no way of actually closing this modal, so I'll have to jump into here again, and we're going to have to add a button just to close that. So to do that, I'm going to just add a button in the nav bar here. So we'll just link that up to a close modal function that we're going to create in a minute. And I'll just use a close icon, which I think is it's either cross or close, I think. Let me just try that, see if that works. Okay, cool. So we have the cross there now. So we can click that to trigger the function, which doesn't exist yet. So we're going to do that now. We'll create the close modal function in here. So we'll say close modal. And when we click this button, we want to dismiss that modal. And to do that, we're going to have to import a thing called the view controller. And we're also going to have to inject that in here. And then we can just call this.viewController.dismiss, and that will trigger closing that modal. So we'll just double check that that works first. Okay, so I'll click next to launch the modal, and I'll click cross, and it goes away. So that's great. We have the modal working now, but we still need to figure out how to pass data from that modal back to the original page. And to do that, what we can do is use a method called onDidDismiss. So you can see I'm presenting the modal here, but if we just jump into the documentation for the modal controller, you can see that in this case they're creating the modal here, but before it's being presented, this onDidDismiss listener is being set up. So what this will do is it'll wait for that modal to be dismissed, and when it is, it'll allow some data to be passed back. So we're going to get set up our own handler now. So we'll do modal.onDidDismiss, and then we can just pass in the data that's being returned, and we can do whatever we want with it in here. So all I'm going to do now is just log that data out. And then if we come into the second page, we can pass that data back in a similar way to what we did with the nav controller before. So let me just quickly create another little data array here, or object rather, and this time I'll just say hello and how are you, and to pass that back we just have to supply it to the dismiss method. So if I add the data here, save it, hopefully we can jump into the browser again and see that data being logged out on the home page. So click next to launch the modal, and when I close this, we can see that that is now being logged out, the data I added to the dismiss method, and that's coming from the home page now. So we've had the second page pass data back to the home page and log that out. Now another way you can share data around your application is to use a provider as a singleton object, where basically anywhere in the application you're going to be able to access this object and grab some values for it or set some values on it. So I'm going to go through a really quick example of how to do that. So we're going to generate a new provider now. So we'll run Ionic G provider, and we'll just call this user. So we'll pretend we have some user data that we want to share throughout multiple different pages. And just like we had to do with the page, we're going to have to come in here and set that up in our module file. So I'm going to import that provider that I just set up. And set it up in the providers array here. So now if I jump into that provider we created, the user provider here, what I can do is I can create any kinds of methods I want on this, which I'll be able to call from any page, or I can even just set some data directly on here that I could directly access. So for the sake of keeping this really simple, I'm just going to get rid of this stuff that I don't need, and we're just going to do a really simple example of setting a value on here. So I'm just going to create a username string here, and we'll just set it to Josh for now. So if I was to come into our home page again now, I could import that user provider and inject it into the constructor here. I'll quickly just save that to make sure everything is all good. I'll just serve the page. Okay, so nothing seems to be broken yet, so the paths are all probably correct. And so what I'm going to do is I'll just hook into this launch second page function here, and I'll just delete this stuff for now. So all I'm going to do is access this .userservice.username, and I'm just going to log that out. So if we jump back into the browser again and click on the next button, you can see that Josh is being output to the console here. So that user provider could be injected into any page anywhere in the application. We could modify the values in that provider from anywhere in the application. So this shared provider could be used to share data in any page in any manner, basically. So it's fine to use this where it makes sense, but I wouldn't rely on it too much in a case where it makes more sense to say pass the data through the nav controller like we had in the first example, or through using modal. It makes more sense to keep the data flow working in that manner rather than just creating global singleton objects for things. But in some cases it does make sense, like in the case of a user service where you're going to access values from that provider in all different areas of the application and you need just a single reference to it. So we're going to go through one final example now of how we could share data between pages, and that's using events. Now events are it's a utility provided by Ionic, which is a way to create application-wide level events. So I can trigger an event from anywhere in the application, and then I could listen for that event anywhere else in the application. So if we just jump into the documentation here, we should be able to find an entry for events here. And so basically it works as a publish and subscribe type system here. So it's like an observable. You can see here that they're using events to publish a user created event, which is passing on some data, and then that event can be subscribed to elsewhere to retrieve that data. And now I'm not sure if this syntax is actually correct here. I think it's only supposed to take in a single event data object. I haven't actually tried to see if this syntax does work or not, but we're just going to be passing in a single event data object and grabbing that somewhere else. So the scenario I'm going to run through here is we're actually going to bring this modal back. But we're going to get rid of this ondid dismiss handler. We're just going to display the modal directly. I'm going to get rid of this as well. And so what I want to do basically is launch this modal and have it so that maybe we are launching an add recipe page. And from this page, we can add as many recipes as we want. So maybe we want to add 5 different things before even closing that modal. So we'll also get rid of this data here. And we'll just make this close modal just close it now. Also delete that. And so we're going to import that events class from Ionic. So we'll import that here, and again we'll inject it into our constructor. And we're going to create another function here called add recipe, and we're going to trigger that from our page here. So we're just going to add in another button, and that's going to trigger our function. So we'll just say add recipe. So when the user clicks add recipe, we're just going to create some more fake data here. We'll go back to the pancakes example again, make it a bit simpler this time. And so what we want to do is then use the events to publish that event, and so anywhere else in the application we'd be able to listen for that. So I'm going to do this .events .publish, and we're going to call this event recipe added, and we'll just pass through that data. So whenever we click on that button now, we're going to publish an application-wide event that will have that data sent along with it. So that means we can jump into our home page again here, and we can also import that events class and set it up here. And then we just need to set up a listener for events that are being published. So we're going to add the IonView_didLoad hook here, and then we can just do this .events.subscribe, and we're going to subscribe to the recipe added event. So let me just double check that's what I called it. Yes. and then that's going to pass us back some data that we can do something with. So for now, I'll just log that out. We just want to check that it actually works. So now every time that this event is detected, it's going to run this handler here and log out that data. So we'll save that and check that it works. Okay, so I'll launch the modal first, and click on Add Recipe, and you can see Home has logged out that data we were publishing. So if I can just keep clicking this, that's just going to happen again and again and again. I can do that as many times as I want, and then I can close it and go back to my home page. So the methods I've gone through in this tutorial are probably just about all you'll need to do in terms of sharing data between pages. As a general rule, try to stick to the first two methods that I mentioned where you can. If you can just pass it through the nav controller by using nav params, do that. If you can use a modal to pass data back to a previous page, if that makes sense in your application, use that. But where it's required, the using events and using a singleton provider can also make sense in an application. Okay, so I hope you learned a bit about how to pass data between pages in Ionic 2 in this tutorial, and I will see you in the next one.